In the last episode of Pinball, Noelle Sélevy's party of strangers came under attack by the Cambion factory's homegrown mortal militia, the Hunters. Though their soldiers posed little to no threat, it was the arrival of their vice marshal, Saigō, that struck fear into their hearts. After a brief phone call, the group discovered that the no-kill order protecting their lives was no longer valid. Soldier Siegfried Newsom, Leica's second-in-command, took it upon himself to strike first, and thus, so died Mick Strings, King of Things. Noelle and Saigō fled, leaving behind April S., and took an indirect route via the filter plate to the home of the Hunters, Citadel Othris, where Saigō demanded to speak to Grand Marshal Verentine, only to find Leica her only option. Credit to them, the surrounding Hunters remained still and steady, despite the fact that the mere presence of Satogaeri gave them heart palpitations. Noelle was picking it up on their life signatures. The second wait for Leica took so long that she'd had the time to count that exactly 98 of the 104 soldiers were probably talking to their respective deities. Saigō was unarmed, which prompted Noelle to wonder what she'd done in the past to deserve such a reputation. Mick had mentioned that one thing about her name, how her power sucked out your senses one at a time, the longer she used it. On reflection, it sounded a little interrogation-y. It could have been something simple that struck a chord with them. It could have been her image alone that did them damage. Was she covered in great, cavernous scars from all her previous victories? It could be assumed that Noelle struck just as much fear in them as Saigō did, and that thought made her a little proud. She felt like Mick would have been impressed how well she'd handled herself. She was a little heartbroken that they'd not gotten to talk about her earlier trick with the hammer, but she could have sworn that he'd shouted "yeah" as she'd done it. She wouldn't be throwing herself into anything like that again. It was time to lay low and remain underestimated. Leica might have been on the way to their location, but the Ace of Cups was closer by, likely lost somewhere in the behemoth before them. Citadel Othris, home to the Hunters, rang out to Noelle as though it was made of living mortar. It must have been home to 1 million, maybe more. Worker bees, both above and beneath the ground, steamed away, entirely unaware of outside circumstances. It surely pierced the sky, shooting straight up and out of Noelle's three-dimensional range. It was very distracting. It amounted to the same effect she'd felt near the ocean, where the lines had meshed with the wash of the waves. All those lives, like a nest of fire ants, seemed to writhe together, becoming a viscous, shape-shifting noise that rocked her into seasickness. It was the first time that Noelle needed to tune something out, and it was no more difficult than a brief request to Byleth, who pinched the sound off at the end. It was another few minutes before Leica arrived at the Citadel, along with the remaining members of her squadron. Siegfried was not amongst them, and Noelle could tell that he had been left behind. He wasn't hiding, at least. In fact, once the Vice Marshal had parted the sea of subordinates, her first words were an apology, and perhaps with genuine sincerity. Her second-in-command had been demoted, quote, on the spot, quote, entirely removed from the island for re-education based on his, quote, failure to respond to orders. It didn't seem enough. Noelle wanted to pull him into the filter plate and leave him there to rot. She could not imagine what that would do to a person, and she felt that he deserved it. It was fortunate, then, that Satogaeri was level-headed. If she held a grudge, it was kept deep below the surface. She didn't tremble as she accepted the space dog's apology, and she didn't say a word after it. Discussion could not commence until the Ace of Cups came down to join them. All right. They heard her voice first, coming in over the loudspeaker she wore in her mask. It broke through the yapping crowd like a public service announcement. Geez, Leica, take your time, huh? They're nothing but animals, and it's our job to put them down, she said, sauntering down the Citadel's expansive, concrete stair set. Patient, silent, but certainly there, Noelle could hear the infant, Nyoro, strapped to Ace's chest like a bulletproof vest. You're no good to us, not if you're gonna be all like that. Silence, called Leica. Satogaeri is still the gluttony, and therefore she is still your superior officer, is she not? No, said Ace in a sort of matter-of-fact manner. I mean, she's been missing for nearly 2 years now. I've literally brought you the paperwork that says you should be killing her right now. Pish posh, said Laika. Show me your thumbnails, please. Strangely enough, Saigō obeyed Laika's direction without hesitation. So certain that the Vice Marshal would not attack without prior warning, she left Noelle's side to show Laika her birthmarks. 1, 0. She hasn't been struck through, said Laika. The father would not be best pleased. Such a softie, said Ace. You don't work for the father. This is going to be the Queen of Coins all over again, Laika countered. And I maintain that the Queen of Coins deserved a fair trial, regardless of the fact that the Adelaide incident cost us the entire Staves unit, said Ace as she grit her teeth together. Yeah. Laika managed to remain reserved in the face of such brashness, almost to the point of mutiny. It was evident that she would not fight on their behalf, not literally, but she appeared to be in their corner at least. Still, while the hunters and the gatherers acted like total opposites, they were, in the end, two sides of the same charred coin, both in the pocket of this bastard family they kept talking about. Whatever it was that the mother and the father were up to required permanent subservience, and absolutely nothing else. What war is it then? Asked Noelle, in words that came out of her by near pure accident. We are soldiers, aren't we? I mean, or are we? You all seem to just be standing around here, fighting each other. Honest to God, are you fucking kidding me? No. See, this is what we've got to put up with these guys. You've got to explain everything, all over again, every time they wake him up, said the Ace of Cups, just irate about it. Her words screeched out of the loudspeaker like feedback. You don't understand, do you? This whole island is just for you. You statues, you Franken bastards. If you'd just behave and do the job— What job? She asked. What possible need do you have for reading minds or going to the filter plate or— Saigō, what does Ace do? Saigō answered. Strong hair, she said. Long hair. I mean, come on, said Noelle. What for? For us? In case we escape? Then what the hell are we here for? Defense, dear, said Laika, placing Saigō Satogaeri in handcuffs by the sound of it. No fight from the prisoner, not even an irregular sweat. I understand. We are rather isolated here. Oh, how do I make this clear? Cambion are not the biggest threat in the world, not really. There's always been myths and monsters and things to be afraid of out there. Only, the more the world seemed to meddle in the affairs of the strange, the more blazon the oddities became in return. That's where we come in, of course. We are, and by we I mean all of us, are part of AEGIS, the Anti-Extinction God Initiative System. I cannot tell you in good faith that the world outside is at total war, Noelle, she said. I will, however, implore you to understand that we serve a greater purpose overall. One no more important than that which concerns yourselves, but one that must come first in order for progress to be achieved. Just think about it, you fucking idiot. You're clearly not the only other Cambion, right? So where the hell else is everybody? Said Ace. The Cambion factory works only on a trial and error basis, said Laika. Those who are suited to combat are taken to it. Those suitable for the end game are put into storage. The director sends the rest of them out to fucking Kansas or goddamn Singapore, man. That's where the action is right now. Singapore. They're dealing with space shit, not stuck here dealing with fucking crybabies like you, rambled Ace. Don't get mouthy, reject. You've been struck through. I know, she said back. I just had a few questions. I don't imagine I've got much time left. Ominous. It almost felt as though she didn't know she was going to say that. It just came out of her. It was the truth, though. She'd known from the very beginning that she wasn't cut out for all this absolute nonsense. Honestly, she was getting pretty sick of it all anyway. It was nothing but shouting and fighting. Finally, said Ace. At least we're on the same page now. Laika took Saigō to the foot of the concrete steps, where the two discussed with Ace what exactly one could define as a reasonable expectation from a further, more formal, sat-down discussion. Noelle didn't have the luxury of listening in. as 2 hunters came over from the front row to lock her down with handcuffs too. Over their hushed exchange, the hunters, as if directed to, began rereading her rights in quite a loud register. She had the right to remain silent, and that was pretty much it, but the dialogue itself was actually at least 6 minutes long. Afterwards, she was led to the top of the stairs and told to wait quietly. "I can leave whenever," said Noelle. "I'm fairly certain these are useless." All came to an agreement. Ace would take Saigō to a holding pen, and the mother would be contacted. Neither one of them was quite sure where the mother would be right now, but she was certainly off island. Noelle wondered exactly what Saigō had to offer such a powerful entity, especially one that had only just declared intent to slaughter. Noelle herself would be taken by the Vice Admiral elsewhere in the Citadel. Not a single hunter followed the Tetrad into Othris, but, as it turned out, their attendance would have been unnecessary. A grand gate, more than 4 times as large as Noelle herself, shuddered open and allowed them to cross from concrete to marble. It closed itself behind them in an overly dramatic swing, sealing them inside amongst a swarm of echoed footsteps. Reams of soldiers, or associates of, passed their slow-led group from every direction, only nearly nicking Noelle. Leica kept to her side, leading her by the bicep. Apart from the trot of 100 steel-toe caps, the reception hummed with only one other sound: the mechatronic throbbing of multifarious elevator shafts lining the circumference of the room. Not a single person spoke, making it only a modicum easier to concentrate on exactly what was happening. Noelle and Saigō were being separated without final, parting words. Hell, she was already lost amongst the grand central chaos of Citadel Othris. It seemed like a done deal for Saigō, though. Noelle couldn't help anymore. Not that she had helped, not very much. So she wished her well, knowing that she was doing what she felt was necessary to keep that child safe. It made her think of Mick and how he never got to sock the father once and for all. It made her think about Leica's apology and how she'd meant it, but what did that mean anyway? And what did it matter? Briefly, she wondered about April S. and where the hell that goat had gone. Last of all, she thought about herself and how she would carry out her end of the deal. Leica slowed them to a stop by tapping her cane, and a set of elevator doors clunked open for them. It sounded like an old system, loose and rickety, compared to the sparkle of recently polished marble and soft, conditioned air. "Let's go, okay?" said Leica, taking her one step at a time onto the bobbing platform. "You don't have to be so gentle," said Noelle, shaking her handcuffed fists. "I'm a prisoner, aren't I?" The Vice Marshal said nothing. She slid her finger down what sounded like 1,000 buttons, almost unsure of which to choose. After all, where exactly would you keep somebody who could leave whenever they please? Then the doors slid closed, and the rumbling started up. It became impossible to tell how fast or far and in which direction they were going, but the taste of the air suggested they were heading deep, deep underground. "Where have you taken Saigō?" asked Noelle. Leica let her bicep go, reached behind her, and folded down a stool from the walls of the vessel, and asked, "Would you like a seat, dear?" With conviction, the prisoner repeated her question. "Saigō Satogaeri has surrendered herself to AEGIS," said Leica. "She will be allowed to bargain with the mother for the return of infant 020, and if all goes well as I would expect, the mother should have no qualms with placing them together in the holding cells." "Nyaro," said Noelle. "Baby's name is Nyaro." "Oh, is it now?" Leica rummaged through a zipped knapsack she kept somewhere on her uniform. From it, she produced a pencil and a small notebook. One moment, she pressed the notebook against the trembling walls and took down a few notes. "Nyaro," she repeated. "I'll remember that." Back it went, into the knapsack, and Noelle remembered her lone right to silence. "I am taking you to B landing. From there, I will escort you to the anthill. It's our emergency exit strategy," said Leica. "This place was built by witches in the 18th century. Did you know that?" Noelle did not pull the thread. "I don't need an emergency exit strategy," she said, thinking she might blip in and out just to prove it to her. She didn't, in fear that she might apparate amongst the sand and prove Byleth's earlier theory correct. "I can go anywhere." "I am aware," replied Laika, tapping on the knapsack. I am doing my grandest to offer you ample escape time from 0 floor. The anthill is the furthest point below ground. Well, said Noelle. She was a little stunned, but pressed forwards regardless. Why the fuck would you do that? Call it a conscience, if you will, she said. I have seen an awful lot since I replaced the prior vice marshal last month, and yet, what my lieutenant pulled this afternoon, I can only apologize. Oh yeah, said Noelle. Means a lot, thank you. Contrary to what you may believe, I don't wish harm on you. Laika spoke with conviction, nearly innocence, but one doesn't get a position like vice marshal by being nice, do they? Saigō understood that, as did Mick, bless him. She tapped the bag again. King of things, right? I can do nothing for you but apologize, but I must have you know that Siegfried was never a choice of mine. If I am to be honest, I have seen him as nothing but a punishment. It could only have been that. It was the decree of the Grand Marshal, so that's that. I am glad to be rid of him, though it happened by unfortunate circumstances. There it was again. Laika Rossi seemed to strike such a fine balance in Noelle's mind, where her words were simultaneously aggravating and yet understandable, like she had a certain difficulty articulating herself to the degree that her vocabulary might suggest. Taking after Mick, she wanted nothing more than to sock her. Byleth stirred, interjecting that she should not allow herself to lose her cool, and yet she silenced them with only a thought. I am truly sorry. I only very recently learned your true nature, Laika continued, and since then, I have been having second thoughts about AEGIS as a whole. Excuse me? Laika paused for a moment, then took up the seat she'd set up earlier. Are you aware of your construction? She asked, to which Noelle nodded. A more specific answer did not feel necessary. The Ace of Cups is Cambion, but she was not built. The Ace of Cups was born. She was raised, she went to school, she graduated, she was offered an opportunity and she took it. Delivered unto her was the remnant, Shax. Now AEGIS is able to drop her around the world to capture rogue Cambion for the company's benefit. Noelle's focus was elsewhere. Just as she was thinking about the length of the elevator ride, it jutted and stopped. Recoil knocked her off her feet and she hit the floor face first with a thunder. Laika leapt to her assistance, throwing out an arm like a ring boy, but Noelle swatted it away with her cuffed fists. She could, at the very least, stand up on her own. It would just take some doing. We alight here at B landing, said Laika, taking her at the bicep again. Contrary to 0 floor, B landing had no enemy presence, many above, some below, but nobody on this particular floor. Here, she felt she could allow Byleth to breathe and flood her ears once more with life's raucous cacophony. Somewhere, amongst the stochastic discord, was the twin signature that belonged to the Ace of Cups. Seek it, said Noelle under her breath. Help me. Did you say something, dear? Asked Laika, stepping the two of them off the elevator platform. You'll have to forgive me. I'm afraid my ears aren't as good as yours are. Probing for the Ace of Cups was like choosing a novel from a bookshelf of 4 edges. Outright, there were no Cambion above her, at least as far as her range was concerned. And when she scanned beneath herself, she felt more than she'd wished. 3? No, maybe there were 4 Cambion elsewhere in the building. Not one of them stood together. Ideally, she was looking for 2 Cambion at once, Ace and Nyoro, but she couldn't do it. Hope crossed the prisoner's mind. Perhaps the mother had made good with Saigō, but Saigō wasn't amongst them either. From so far away, the applicable wavelengths felt more like thin threads, so she could hardly read the peaks. She'd have recognized Saigō, though. She'd know that familiar buzzing, and it was nowhere to be found. Now, don't worry yourself silly, said Laika, thumbing the buttons once more. I can promise that the Ace of Cups has no grounds to strike Saigō or Nyoro, not while we're here. If you can't sense them, then all is well. They will be put to sleep in the holding cells, in the same way that you were. How do you know? She said. Don't tap that goddamn notebook, I swear. No, dear. Smoke comes out of your ears when you do it, she said. Just a joke. "Stop calling me dear, will you?" snapped Noelle, her temper shortened by the excess of noise. It could only be assumed that the life signature currently moving through the citadel was Ace, so discarding the other three for now, she followed it, focused on it, and had Byleth slowly filter out anything that wasn't her. It stopped for a moment, and then all of a sudden it got closer and closer and closer until it passed right by her. It shot up, straight towards 0 floor. The aged screech of the elevator system all but confirmed it. It was the Ace of Cups and her remnant shacks. Impulse burned through her. As she had learned, Noelle reached out in her mind to grasp that resonance that Ace gave off. Nothing happened. Not right away. But that did not stop her. She kept on at it, refusing to let go, as it slipped further and further away, stretched it, hung on for dear life. Could Ace feel that? Did it mean anything to her? Was it happening at all? Perhaps like a sort of placebo effect. The strain she was putting herself through simply felt like it was doing something. "Shall we get going then?" asked Laika, snapping Noelle out of her trance. "Going where?" asked Noelle, expecting soon some kind of headache or nosebleed in return for over-strenuous thinking. "Where the fuck do you think I'm gonna go?" "I suppose I hadn't thought of that," she said. "I'm not exactly an ally, Noelle. I'm just doing my bit, so to speak." She hesitated at the end of that sentence, like she recognized that that clearly wasn't enough, so to speak. She didn't act on it though. Behind her, the elevator they'd just stepped out of closed back up and returned to 0 floor. "Saigō might have trusted you, Laika, but I don't," she said. "You're just the space dog, or whatever, to me. You're a bad guy. Jesus, one of you cut my goddamn friend in half without a fucking word. I don't want your help, Laika Rossi, it's fucking meaningless." Vitriol spewed out of her, and an immediate wash of shame dripped down the back of her neck. She felt a little embarrassed because she'd done it without thinking the words through. At the same time, though, it was good that she could feel that shame again. Shame was better than nothing at all, and at the very least, she'd gotten the bulk of it off her chest. It was her last chance, really. That same elevator was now back on its way down, carrying inside it the Ace of Cups. "At the very least," said Noelle, "you could take off my handcuffs." "I'm afraid not," Laika replied. She'd taken notice of the elevator too, tilting her head behind her. "Shall we board?" she asked, "before it's too late?" That time had come, however. Noelle Sélevy had resorted to death. The returning elevator dinged, and the old doors chugged open once more. Out came Ace, the Gatherer. She was no longer wearing a mask, her voice definitively feminine. "That you, is it? Making all that noise in my head?" You have been listening to Pinball, Measure 5, Crescendo, written and directed by Jay Clusie. This production is copyright 2021 by the Sleepybones Detective Agency. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. If you'd like to support the show, please visit us at patreon.com/SBDA.